All right, so we can begin. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is afternoon in Nairobi, Kenya. Welcome to this session of the HORN webinar, the title Rethinking Elections and Democratic Practice in Eastern Africa. This is the HORN Institute, which is a regional think-do tank based in the Horn of Africa, but we're based in Nairobi. For this session, we're going to have Miss Ayan Hassan, who is an expert in peace building, who will be moderating the session. And I'm going to let Ayan introduce the panel and give context of the discussion. You're most welcome to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Welcome all. I hope I am at the moment audible. Greetings from Nairobi and welcome to this webinar on rethinking elections and democratic practice in Eastern Africa. We'll be looking at our, reflections today from an angle of crisis, adaptation, and the future of political participation. So recent discussions and deliberations around the region point to a growing consensus concern that electoral processes are evolving into largely what we see as procedural exercises that do not fully reflect the popular will or even guarantee, meaningful political competition. The current electoral cycle across the region is unfolding against a backdrop of, compounding pressures. We are looking at a region that is dealing with post-conflict fragility, shrinking civic space, weakening institutional architecture, as well as, deepening citizen mistrust. That's what we're seeing in the region. Recent elections in Uganda and Tanzania, and, the upcoming polls in Somalia, South Sudan, Ethiopia, are raising questions, not just about how elections are conducted, but, whether they are delivering genuine political change. What we see is a civic space that is under pressure. We're seeing citizen trust that is eroding and young people that are not only asking questions, but making hard choices about whether electoral participation is worth their investment. Given all this, this webinar is now bringing together practitioners, peace and security experts, researchers, and advocates for critical reflection, and to examine, what the future of political participation in the region looks like. We will have with us a group of practitioners and advocates, among them Anne Kathirima, Mr. Amani Mhinda, and Nerima. I will, introduce them. To you shortly, and after that, we will be getting into the discussions for today. So to guide us through these conversations, we have Anne Kathirima. Anne has over 20.
Thanks, Leon.
Sorry, so whoever is on, and kindly mute yourself. Should we have gotten through a few housekeeping rules? All right. Anne has over 28 years of experience working, with international, continental organizations, regional mechanisms, civil society organizations, NGOs, and institutions, in politics. She's worked on gender, she's worked on elections, provides training on certain thematic areas, including mediation, women, peace, and security, almost in over 30 states. She also engages with, CPMR mechanisms, including the African peer review mechanism, which seeks, for those of you who are familiar with it, which seeks to find African solutions to African challenges, as well as peace support operations in the region. And as a member of AU FemWise Africa, she contributes to policy formulation on increasing women's representation at all levels of decision-making for the prevention and resolution of conflicts. With us also, have this, conversation is Mr. Amani Mustafa Mhinda. Amani brings over 20 years of experience in public policy, social justice, philanthropic grant-making, project management. He has been in the region working on advocacy and community organizing. He has held senior advisory and non-profit leadership roles. He is currently in a position as the executive director of the Kaya Institute for Pan-African Policy. So his work is defined by policy and practice. Previously, Mr. Amani, served as a program manager at the Open Society Foundation, Africa, overseeing fiscal justice, natural resource trade, social policy, and climate action projections. Notably, he has led, civil society pushing for governance reforms in Tanzania and other African countries on trade, mining, oil, and gas sectors, which is, very pertinent to the discussion that we are having today on electoral integrity and the space of the civic space or space for civil society. He is also a practitioner, a certified practitioner in ICF Global Executive Leadership Coaching, organizational development practice, and emotional intelligence practice. Finally, we will have Ms. Nerima Wako with us today to also take us through this discussion from a youth angle. Ms. Nerima is the executive director of Siaya Place, an organization that is youth-led and youth-focused civic tech that is building confidence, skills, competencies, and institutional structures necessary for meaningful and dignified participation of young people in politics. What we see in the region is now the conversations around the space and role of young people in politics. Siaya Place is leveraging on technology to expand the reach and quality of young people's engagement in the social, economic, civic, and political life of their communities, right? So having Nerima as a forward-looking leader with Siaya Place, this organization has been engaging with young people at the moment, over 8,000. And we are very glad to have young people taking up this space to contribute to the discussions and policy formulation. Panelists, you're all welcome to this conversation. Just a quick one that we will have 15 minutes for each panelist. And I welcome you, to take us through and deliberate on electoral integrity in the East African regional from, your experiences, what you see happening in the region, what you're observing, and, maybe the patterns you have seen and the recommendations that you will draw for mechanisms and institutions within the region. With that being said, I think I would like to start our conversation with Anne Katerina to sort of set the tone for this entire discussion, because we need to look at the state of electoral integrity in Eastern Africa. And looking across the recent electoral cycle in East Africa, what patterns are you, observing in the electoral cycle? What patterns are you observing in how elections are being conducted and contested? And what do you see, or do you think these patterns are telling us about the state of electoral integrity in Eastern Africa? And Katrina, over to you.
Thank you, Ayan, and good afternoon, all. From an election point of view and looking at how the electoral integrity is happening, maybe we need to take a step back and see where we are coming from. From the time the Berlin Wall came down to the fall of the Soviet Union, elections were not common in Africa. But now we are seeing regimes, governments are almost falling over themselves to conduct elections. But now it begs the question, how credible or how can we measure the integrity of these processes, if I may put it that way? And what we are seeing is that Election is not an event, it is more of a process. It's something that is continuous. And in the election world, we call it the electoral cycle, which begins from the election day and post-election, and then the cycle continues. So when we are looking at the integrity of the elections or the integrity of the process, this is where we begin and this is where we start. That almost every country, be it democratic by paper or by practice, they're all conducting elections. And we are asking ourselves, so what is electoral integrity? Is it credible and transparent elections? Yes. How credible are these elections at the end of the day? Independent and funded institutions, these are the EMBs, the electoral management bodies. How funded are they? And how are they able to conduct the elections without the interference of maybe the regime of the political players? The respect of rule of law. This is where people actually put electoral laws, adhere to them, and respect them to the end. Then the other one we are seeing is the issue of the media independence. How are the media conducting themselves, be it the public media, be it the private media? Are they giving balanced coverage when it comes to the electoral actors? Civic freedoms. Are the electorate, the voters of these countries, being able to vote without any challenge, any or any manipulation? The universal suffrage continues to be an integral point, and I know, Ariane, you've spoken about Somalia. Until today, Somalia do not have universal suffrage. The elders of the clan and the leaders of the clans are the ones who vote. Then, opposition participation. How free are they able? We've seen in the region, Tundu Lissu is in prison. Why? Because he was fighting for the reforms. No reform, no election. But now it ended him up in prison. We saw Kiza Besigye still in prison. Reason? Because he was working towards the 2026 elections in Uganda, and the list continues. Then the electoral dispute resolution mechanisms. Once you agree, once you feel that you have not had a fair chance in the ballot, there's a recourse in the judiciary system, which we call the EDR. But how fair is it? In Tanzania, for example, once the candidate is declared winner, the recourse for EDR is not there. And the list continues, where we are seeing electoral violence, so that it's no longer a celebration of democracy, but it is more of curtailing of freedoms. It's curtailing of civil liberties that we continue to see around the region. And when I say the region, I mean the Horn of Africa. So taking another step is also, what are we witnessing? What are we seeing? Is the dominant incumbency. You're almost guaranteed, you can predict, you are not a prophet, but you can predict who is going to win the elections way before the elections are won, because of the dominancy of the incumbency. We are seeing the restriction of opposition, whereby the opposition is almost curtailed and they're not even able to campaign or even take up the electoral space, if I may put it. Then an even political competition. We saw in Uganda what happened to the opposition candidate, that is, what is his name? Robert Tangulani, famously called Bobby Wine, curtailing of his freedoms, even when he was coming to campaign. It was almost non-existent for him, because every time he would go to the campaign field, he would meet with the police. Then we are seeing a very shrinking civic space, whereby all the freedoms, the liberties that we fought for in terms of the second liberation, be it in Kenya, be it in Uganda, be it in Tanzania, which now are all multi-partism. But it's more like we have come back to the areas where the things that we thought we had entrenched, for example, or things that we had said that we had already overcome, are the things that now that are affecting us. So what are the issues that we look at when we are looking at electoral integrity? issues of weak institutional trust, where many people cannot even trust the EMBs, starting from candidates being the voters. And I will give a good example of my country, Kenya, whereby IEBC is zero trust by the electorate, and they feel that the IEBC is more of a mouthpiece of the ruling regime at that particular time. And we see so many other things that come to play. So institutional trust is one. Then the other that is really need, and it's a conversation that we really need to have further, is on the issue of the winner takes it all. In 2022 Kenyan election, the incumbent, the President Ruto, won by a margin of 6 million votes. The late Prime Minister Raila Odinga won by a margin of 5 million votes, just a difference of 200,000. But with all that, Raila has no official opposition. All he finds himself is, with all that vote, he just goes back and become a normal citizen. So where is the place of winner takes it all? Then election-related violence, where election has been seen as a double-edged sword, a conflict prevention tool, and also an early warning mechanism. But what are we seeing? That if I am going out to vote, my vote is weaponized, and I am either not allowed to vote or not allowed even near the polling station, or if I vote, I have consequences because I voted the person that I'm not supposed to vote for example. Then manipulation of election technology. Kenya, we keep on saying it is the second largest election related cost when it comes to elections in the world. Papua New Guinea being number one, then Kenya number two. But the election technology somehow, and we don't know what madness happens when we know very well that once the votes are cast, counted, they're final at the polling station. But somehow the election technology finds its way to give us a winner, which most of us wonder, is election technology supposed to assist us to get to enhance the voter the election credibility, or is it supposed to curtail the freedoms of who is winning? Then in the region, we are seeing elections and electoral related violence being a peace and security issue, whereby if there is violence in Kenya, it will affect Tanzania, it will affect Uganda. And we saw what happened in Tanzania in the 2025 elections, October. Kenyans wanted to cross over to go and help their brothers and sisters, as I may put it. And they were curtailed at the borders. Again, in Uganda, before the shutdown, Kenyans also wanted to come to Uganda and also help their brethren on fighting for their civil liberties. So taking a step back and looking and seeing, saying that the election technology, the electoral field, the civic freedoms, the media independence, all this contributes to election integrity. Then, when all this is said and done, and the winner is announced, we are seeing issues of legitimacy disputes, where incumbents are changing constitutions at will. Just recently, Rwanda, which they were going for a 5-year election cycle, now have changed and doing 7 years. We saw in Rwanda, where they changed the constitution. Now it is a 7-year term from a 5-year term. We saw in Uganda, they removed the term limits, they removed the presidential voting age. And all these things are boiling down to legitimacy issues, delayed transitions, where an incumbent is supposed to hand over power. Somehow something happens and they either declare themselves as presidents for life or regimes for life. Then a lot of digital misinformation and disinformation, and this one especially affects women, where we are seeing a lot of technical facilitated gender-based violence on online spaces, that a lady cannot just come and maybe, for example, campaign without them being victimized, without them being abused or even bullied within the digital space. And in this day and age of artificial intelligence, we are even seeing videos which are continuing to be manipulated. And from a naked eye, it's very difficult for you to know that this is a manipulated video. And the electorate will take it as it is. And then what do we see? We see people continue and a lot of misinformation. By the time fact checking is being done, a lot of damage has been done. So these are some of the things that I am seeing that are happening within the region, which are really, really affecting the election integrity.
Thank you, Anne, for setting, the stage on the state of electoral integrity in Eastern Africa. Some of the patterns that you've mentioned seem to be, long-standing to an extent in terms of whether we are conversing around electoral, fairness, transparency, voter apathy, but then also, the long-standing challenges on whether media, or rather how media is engaging as well in electoral integrity. Talked about, the concept of winner takes all, which seems to be a challenge in the region, where, you find political parties, not just representatives, excluded from the whole governance architecture to an extent, which creates, a continuous cycle of repetitive mistrust and other challenges around, electoral integrity that we see. Legitimacy disputes, universal suffrage, and participation of opposition in, the electoral cycle. So we see where we are coming from. We are seeing what the patterns are in the, the region that is the Horn and East Africa region. But then in terms of, understanding where we are headed, I, will point to the point that you put across in terms of looking at the best practices and being prepared, or rather having an understanding of where the challenges are and being prepared to that end on how we revise and review and reevaluate electoral integrity in this region of ours. Before I move on, I have two points to note. The first is I'm being told I need to inform that those of you who are not speaking to leave your mics on mute. And secondly, that there will be a Q&A session at the end, towards the end of this webinar. But then if you have any questions as we go along, please feel free to drop it in the chat box, and I will pass it on to the panelists. Thank you for that. Now we are going to, shift slightly from, that overview to get into some level of detailed reflection on who is who when it comes to, this topic of democratic practices and elections in the Eastern Africa region, which is, we have, Anne has already pointed out a few actors in the space, including, civil society, media, and other political parties, including, key opposition leaders and their political representatives. Getting into detail to understand, the current state of the civic space in the region is Mr. Amani Mhinda, who will take us, through it. But I think I will ask Mr. Amani from, the positions you've held and your engagement in the region, working on focusing on democratic practices and election. We see in much of the region, that the civic space is impacted. not only, by the restrictive frameworks and the regulatory gaps we see, but also conflict. It's a region that, is either with countries that are either emerging out of conflict or, getting back into conflict and so on and so forth. But, from a point of regulatory frameworks and restrictive frameworks, what conditions do you see exist as we are in the current states? And, what do you think should be done when it comes to broadening this shrinking space in the region for meaningful participation and meaningful competition? Over to you, Mr. Amani.
Thank you very much, Ayan, and thank you, Anne, for laying the ground for this complex conversation. We are at a time where in Africa, generally, we are asking ourselves if elections are worth it or it's just a waste of time. It's become almost like a PR exercise, just to tick the box on so-called democracy. But most of the elections are not holding, and though they could be legal in some cases, it is not giving legitimacy that is required. I just want to remind ourselves that people forget that states are a result of rights of the individuals or collective being given upon the state or the state apparatus in order to have equity and fairness across different spaces. Unfortunately, there's a belief that states can be put together through coercion, but state of that nature doesn't last for long. For it to be democratic, we need to look at it from a rights-based approach. There are rights and obligations on both parties. For those ones who are in power, winning, as they call it, they have to realize election is part of a long contracting process, political and social contracting process, which allow them to act on behalf of the entire population. But the contracting itself cannot work if there is no inclusion, there is no openness, there is no transparency, and there is no accountability. The contract only makes sense if the people themselves are happy by the process and see that it is done as fair and just to everyone's interest. Unfortunately, now the electoral process has become almost like a business. You see a situation whereby there's a lot of money going into election itself, invested into election, and there is state capture at the moment in Eastern Africa and even part of Central and, in the entire Africa. A lot of business interests come in to support the election process. And there's a lot of money that is not accounted for. And this money comes with commitments, which we don't know. Sometimes they forget about it, and after the election, they tell us there was an MOU, which as citizens we didn't know about. They tell us there was a deal, which we didn't know about, on behalf of the citizens. And this means those ones who are in power do not depend on the votes itself. They depend on the business interest. And they are captured when they go into power. They don't feel that like they have obligation to the citizens. And look at all these coalitions, consortiums, I don't know, movements. And Kenya is a very bad example where there are no real political parties. At least in Tanzania, where I come from, we have a very old party, which is calling itself a movement, and it's not moving. It's dead and caught in stuckness, ideological and, integrity issues around it. In Kenya, you can basically jump from one wagon to the other and you get elected. Some people pay for themselves. I was actually privy to a conversation about gender-based violence in elections. And we hear reports about how people pay for them to be nominated. Actually, they become part of a business transaction. And this means there's no social contract between the citizens and whoever goes in power. They have allegiance to someone else. And even worse now, they have a lot of dirty money coming into this circulation because we don't know this how this money is gotten. And there's also unfair advantage where somebody has a lot of money and someone who comes from school, college, who feels like they have a right and have the ability to lead cannot, because they don't have access to funding. They don't have opportunity that someone else has. So all these makes it very, very complex. And this leads me to the civic movement. Systematically, we've seen situation whereby citizens are left out, and this is a systemic thing. We have weakened bar associations, we have weakened NGO movement, we have weakened church movement, we have weakened, in all sort of spaces. The civil society are being weakened, and they legitimize this by using different laws. It started in Kenya, went to Ethiopia, came back to Kenya, went to Uganda, went to Tanzania, where it feels like after the election, you are not supposed to do anything political without being defined what is political or not political till the next election. So in between there, the civic movement is handicapped. And in this case, previously, maybe in the 90s and 2000, we had a situation where people were engaging in civic education, were engaging in electoral monitoring. Nowadays, you don't need that. They are only happy to be validated by the foreign interest. The first people to congratulate them are not the citizens when they win, or they tend to force the win. In Tanzania, there is a saying that there's golia mkono, somebody scores with the hand. It's illegal in football for those ones who love football. But in Tanzania, they justify that. Ukafunga golia mkono and nothing happens for you, as long as you win. So people are playing dirty. So we have situations where, even regional bodies kind of sanitize election. Situation of Tanzania, Kenya, where after the election immediately, even before, even when there's contestation and people are going to court, move to court, countries or business interests or different business blocks claim to congratulate the winner. And you wonder, how did they come to that conclusion? And it's funny because that shows there's a unholy matrimony behind that we don't know. And this is put a situation where by the young people especially, I'm proud of the Gen Z in our countries. Although I am not sure that the journey is finished. I hope Narima can confirm that they're still on.
You have 3 minutes,
but you see, sorry?
You have 3 minutes. Sorry for interrupting.
Okay.
You have 3 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a situation whereby all kind of gathering, all kind of spaces or political spaces are being decimated. So you're not supposed to speak. You're not supposed to gather. And we reach a situation where somebody can disappear and nobody asks. And actually, I think it's a big challenge because even in my country, people have very short memory. We go with the events. You can disappear, money can disappear after people make noise. After 3 months, people forget and they go back to the usual bongo flavor stuff. So I think it's important. One, we need to organize and stop to agonize, because our leaders continue to organize and now continue to be patting each other's shoulder, even to the extent that we are told that if you are whipped in Tanzania, you can also be whipped when you come to Kenya. So there's no space where you can run and to get any kind of help. So I think we need to rethink about how civic space, within civic space, how we organize ourselves. Are we making, are we legitimizing the oppression, or we are creating a difference? And sometimes people run to law and policy and constitution, but Kenya is a good example where constitution can be very fantastic and everybody claim to have been revolutionary and all that, but Kenya is where it was 20 years ago. That's to me, and anybody can argue for that, because I don't think the constitution has changed anything that we saw during Moi's time. You know, it's pretty the same. It's just under a different name and different brand. So yeah, thank you. Let me end there.
Thank you, Mr. Amani. I think you have pointed to, one of the key hindrances or challenges to meaningful participation, especially, in this area, which is the current trends we see when it comes to elections in general, and, the nature of elections as we see today, which, say it's become a business, which means if you do not have the funds to campaign, that you may not participate at all in this process. And we see that to, be a challenge in the region where it's decided by funding rather than by policies or practices, as we like for it to be. Which now flows us into, the next discussion, the next topic of discussion, which is young people. So we are talking about meaningful participation in political, rather in election processes, but then now we are trying to go very specifically and talk particularly on young people and, how they are engaging in election and election processes, and how they see the current state of electoral democratic practices and elections. And to that, I will go to Nerima. Nerima, given your experience working with Siasa Place, youth-led and youth-focused civic tech organization, how are citizens, particularly young people, engaging with democratic processes in the region? And what does the nature of that engagement tell us about their confidence in elections as a tool for political change?
Thank you, Ayan. That's such a heavy question, like the previous questions, and I believe Amani and Anne have answered brilliantly. I was even over here writing notes, but what I'm seeing, or from the perspective that I'm seeing from the work that we do, right? Anne started us off with the wall, the wall of Berlin falling, coming down. And where we are now, are we seeing a decline of democracy and liberalism? And are we seeing the rise of capitalism and AI? I think that we're also in another phase, and it is having a massive impact in our politics, in our elections. That's how we're seeing Trump in China currently and traveling with business gurus. And it was about 12 trillion on that plane in terms of net worth of the people who are on that plane. So it can show you that this country that says to have brought democracy and voting is now sitting at a table with a country that apparently doesn't believe in democracy. So there's a lot happening in the world. And so even when we question elections and then Africa, it's a very complicated context for young Africans. And so what we have seen is a decline in terms of participation, yeah? And that's mainly in the global north. But even in our own participation, like if you look at Nigeria, it had, participation in the 30% in their last election. And we're going to be going through an election with Nigeria as well in 2027. And even our own elections, we're seeing that percentage decreasing. Where, when Anne was giving us the numbers of the difference between Ruto's win and Raila's win, there's actually the winner of that election were the people who didn't vote. The people who had voters' cards and they didn't turn up. That number is even higher than Ruto's win. So that shows you a lot of them were young people. A lot of them were millennials. And now we fast forward to now where we've seen protests. Actually, I don't think there was a research hub doing how many protests have we seen in Kenya, for instance, over the last 2 years. And it's in the hundreds, okay? When you talk about the protests of the Gen Zs, the doctors, the nurses, the workers, there have been so many protests. And that's where I differ a little. I think the constitution has actually brought that out a lot more, especially in younger generations. When a protest was held in 2024 and it wasn't convened by a politician, and then having such a majority, such a vast number of young people being mobilized on issue, shows me that actually this is a progress where it wasn't about, party, tribe. It was about Kenya and bad governance and people saying they want better. That is a huge stark change from where we have been. And the fact that people are even breaking the law or expressing their rights or, breaking it down for people to understand their rights is also another aspect, which you can also say technological advancements and innovations have also supported that. Since people used, ChatGPT to do that, or even using social media platforms to spread this information even in their local dialects, as much as we know that internet penetration is just slightly above 44% in Kenya. So in regards to your question, I do believe that we have witnessed a lot of military coups over the last 10 years. If you look at the youngest leaders currently on the continent, most of them have entered through military coups. When we have elections, we seem to have the oldest getting into power, and that divide continues to just widen. And so you're seeing leadership, except I'm talking about executive leadership, that is extremely old and trying to manage a majority populace that is extremely young. This will have to break. So as much as we are seeing people trying to extend constitutionally their terms and basically die in power, it will force a transition to occur. And what we're seeing is that force is either through the military or even creating our own systems, because even now when you look at some of our countries, we don't know what to describe them as, because we have now created our own sort of governance. And so what I do believe, especially for Kenya, as much as, people think that it's going to be a given, say, for this president to remain because he's an incumbent, I don't think so. I don't think so, because we're also dealing with a country where IEBC, for the first time ever, set a target and they actually surpassed it. And that was because of the momentum around young people, where, 2 years ago, you told them, if you want things to change, you have to do it the proper way. You don't come and just storm parliament. You have to do it the institutional way, you have to do it and vote. And so now here they are, registering, and they will continue to register. And I do believe the turnout is going to be extremely high. And, people are like, well, they're just going to manipulate the elections like we have seen in some countries. And so what difference does that make? It is going to make a massive difference. And I say this because once you stop believing in that cycle, then what's the point of authority? And this is now where, when you start to see young people celebrating military more, it begs us to ask a deeper question, where when they're like, you know what, better the military. And it's a fear. It's a genuine fear, especially for people who have lived in countries that have been controlled by military. But that's what young people are seeing as the solution right now, because governance, democracy is not working for them or answering for them. But I'll conclude by saying that another concern for me, which I don't feel we give enough attention to, is just AI, in regards to when individuals have and own companies that keep data, store it, and then the surveillance that's occurring, the monitoring, and these are companies that are now earning much, much more than entire countries and some even continents. And when they start sitting with presidents and negotiating policy, I believe we're entering a new order, a new system. And that's also something to think about, especially when most of the world will be African in the next 20-30 years, African and Asian. So that is also controlling market, controlling minds, and your opinion won't matter, because right now our leaders are being controlled. So even what voice are we talking about when we say we have a right to elect the leaders that we want?
Thank you, Narima. I think it's a point to note and to reflect on and take with us. Despite the challenges that we see in regards to meaningful participation and the shrinking space, the shrinking democratic space in the region, we see young people coming up with new approaches to engaging in these political spaces. And you pointed to technology, use of technology, where young people are now mobilizing, engaging, and deconstructing using, technology, creating new systems for themselves to an extent. And I like that in your reflections, you went globally, continentally, and then, closer home on how these patterns are changing, what we see as evolving approaches among young people. Thank you for tying it all down, from the current state to the civic space to the role of young people, role of young people in in elections and democratic practices. Thank you all. Thank you to the three of you panelists for deliberating, with us here today on rethinking elections and democratic practices in the region. I would like to just, as a point, to note, what we have seen in the region, where our, conversations are coming from, the discussion on how we perceive democracy and elections in the region, to where we are currently, the state of, electoral integrity, so issues to do with electoral integrity, transparency, and recurring issues around citizen mistrust, and the role of young people and other actors when it comes to, electoral integrity in general. I will at this point open the floor for questions to the panelists. And if you'll allow me, I think I can ask a few as we wait for hands to go up. I am trying to look at my screen to see where that will be. But Nonetheless, I have one question here for Nerima. I'd like to start with, we can pick up from where we stopped and go back to prior conversation. Nerima, young people pushing for their rights have increasingly opted for violence. Is it the only language the government understands? I believe this is how young people perceive, governments or how they feel in regards to their communication with governments. What happened to the principles of nonviolence? Are they not aggravating the structure of fragility and instability? Coupled with that, I think I would like to throw one question to all, which is how can genuinely organic and youth-led movements be protected from co-optation, manipulation, or capture by political actors pursuing, similar or vested interest? I would like that question to be answered by any, and then we can start with Nerima on how young people are pushing for their rights.
Thanks, Solomon. That's a good question. It's not even the protests were peaceful and they were met with violence and tear gas and killings and abductions. So it has been a process in terms of even encouraging young people to actually register. Just that whole belief of there are other ways to do this that are non-violent. Because when you're constantly faced with even just working in CBD and the harassment from, are you carrying your ID or working in groups? So even in the protest, for instance, you couldn't walk more than 3 people. They would throw a tear gas or attack you. So when people see that using peace is not working, then they will move to violence. But it's only a matter of time that we have left. And not to sound like the angel of doom, but for instance, we've been seeing the campaigns that Linda Mwananchi have been doing, Kina Sifuna. They are goons who are being encouraged to disrupt those meetings and gangs. And the last one that they had in Kisumu was non-violent. There's actually a lot of work that the church is doing, civil society is doing, and young people in terms of talking to each other to take the money that politicians are throwing because of that desperation, but to have peaceful events. So it's a lot of coordinated efforts. So I would say it's not that they choose violence. Most of the violence we know was sent by state or rogue politicians to interfere and interrupt with the protesters. Protesters are actually peaceful.
And I think we can start with you to reflect on, how young people, can avoid being co-opted or manipulated vis-a-vis meaningful participation and engagement.
From where I sit, the young people are the majority. We have seen the median age across Africa, and we keep on saying Africa is the youngest continent. So meaning, if it is in terms of numbers, they do have. If it is in terms of resilience, they do have. If it is in terms of organization, they do have. But then what goes on and all this violence that comes about? Yeah, let me echo what Nerima has just said. These young people, all they come with is a bottle of water and a handkerchief to the street. Who has the monopoly of violence? It is the state. Who opens the fire to these young protesters? It is the state. But again, putting on my security cap, I ask myself is, who gives that order to shoot? And when did we start having live ammunition when young people are protesting or when protesters are protesting? Then it tells me there is something fundamentally that has gone so wrong within the security apparatus that allows the security forces, when they come in with all the show and might of violence. I saw tear gas canisters and some other machineries that we only see them during parades. And I'm asking myself, are we fighting a war somewhere in Somalia, for example? And then I'm reminded, oh, it is our young people. And I'm left to wonder, what is it that they portray? What threat is it that they portray to the regime or to the powers that be? But again, looking and seeing the goonism that has been ongoing. Most of them are working side by side with the security officials. And I wonder to myself, are they state-sponsored, or are they politicians sponsored, or are they self-sponsored? Of course, they're not self-sponsored. So we are left with the two. So who is this that gives that go ahead for goons to be alongside security officials? So how can young people then again now come and coalesce themselves and have a powerful voice? It is us to demand that whatever security apparatus is put on the protest or on the streets when the young people are protesting, they will be held individually accountable. It's not the commanding officer, but that police officer who will shoot that trigger is the one who will be held accountable. Then number two, we also hold accountable the commanding officer, because you are the one who is responsible for this formation. Then the last one to be held accountable is the IG of police, because I believe that order does not just come from a vacuum, it comes from somewhere. So someone should be held accountable. So again, and also for the young people, I would urge them, and I'll urge them as a mother, because I'm a mother of 2 Gen Zs, is that when you go to the streets, still go with your water, go with your handkerchief, and go with that phone. Record everything. Because we have seen from the protest, that is how we've been able to identify some of the police officers who have been able to shoot our young people, and who have been able also to be, now they're facing the consequences in the judiciary. Yeah.
Let me come in, Ayan. Thank you, Nerima. At least you gave me hope that you're still at the forefront. I thought you retreated. Gen Z, you've gone back to the always. And thank you, Anne, for putting it bluntly. I think what we are seeing in Eastern Africa is actually militarization of the political space. And it's very dangerous when you see police and goons working next to each other. And this is very serious, and I think the politicians might think they are winning, but it's setting a very, very bad trend, because at the end of the day, these goons will turn into militia. It reaches a time the police cannot control them anymore, because in their head, they are more powerful than the police. And this is disrespect to the national institutions, especially security institutions should be actually given the autonomy to work independently without being politicized. The other institution that is actually being attacked is judiciary. Judiciary has become a space where people are being victimized, and people are using the law, the political class are using the law to actually victimize anyone that stands against them. And we have very weak judiciary. Kenya might be proud because of some great moments, but again, this is like a bonanza effect. One moment it's on, one moment it's off. Tanzania is really, really wanting, and I think we need to strengthen judiciary, because without a strong judiciary, there's no way that we are going to have independent election and integrity within the election process, and there's no way that we're going to have a democratic culture within a country. And we need to really think about long term, how do we make judiciary counter executive? It's not a bad thing. That's the only way we need to do that, including their own finances. That is really important. There's another trend that is also not really, people don't notice. Media. We are happy when we have people from across the border come and buy media houses and all that. And we miss the point that it's very close to the election, and maybe it's organizing towards that election. And we also have to look at their history, where they were. Here in Eastern Africa, the mainstream media are all under ownership of people who have actually political interest and who have taken positions clearly. There are very few for those ones who are, for accountability purposes. And now when we're seeing that within the region now, there's a media takeover, and the ownership of the media have no history of fighting for democracy, we also need to ask ourselves a question. Are we giving which a very important space, which should actually be in a fourth estate? I know we are going to digital space at the moment, but digital space has also its own limitation, as Nerima has put, and there's opportunities there. But we need also to think strongly around that. Lastly, IEBC. IEBC is never independent anywhere, although we call it independent electoral board. There is no independence. There are a lot of studies that have been done around electoral process in East and Southern Africa, and most of the electoral commissions or authorities actually accomplices to all these electoral abuses. And we need to really rethink, how do we make these spaces all these structures more independent and more accountable to the citizens and not to those ones who in power. Sorry, I've taken a lot of your time.
Thank you, Mr. Amani, for bringing all that together. Towards the last remarks, I think now we are understanding better the need, for a multi-sectoral sort of approach when it comes to electoral processes. When we are talking about issues to do with security, and the infrastructure that that addresses those issues has to be engaged in this process as well, the judiciary and so on and so forth. I will call upon three hands that have been up for a minute now. And then I think we can take those three and then, continue in that manner. I had seen Isa Mohammed. So Isa Mohammed, and then I don't want to butcher your name, so the pronunciation is becoming a bit Zene. Isa, I think we can start with you. Sorry. Okay. All right. As we wait for Isa Mohammed, and anyone else who has a question, please feel free to raise your hand. As we wait for that, I would like to, reflect a little bit with the panelists on the infrastructure, architecture, structures that we, have established and operationalized, not just in Kenya and Uganda, Somalia, all the Horn of Africa region. And, as elections are held every 5 years, but 5 to 7 years in the region. We've had Uganda, which has just concluded, Djibouti as well during this year. Ethiopia will be going to the elections, for the lower house, I believe. And then we have Kenya, which is coming up, and we have seen, I think I'm talking from a point that is biased to an extent because I am here in Kenya and I have, following and observing the trends as they evolved. I think as a takeaway, as a parting shot, when it comes to the institutions themselves that have been established, created, operationalized to address this tool that, that is supposed to, in many ways, act as a social contract with, the citizenry of the region. We see the greatest challenge within this institution. So as a parting shot, I will say, through the Nerima and Amani, what will you, from your experience and practice, what will you say, that we need to critically analyze and review, our approach towards engaging in electoral processes, regarding particularly the infrastructure, the institutions, and I'm, picking up from where Amani had left in regards to IEBC. So we've had similar institutions, and you have had the opportunity to monitor, observe, and train on elections. So I will start with you, to reflect on that and leave us with some sort of, a takeaway on how we need to approach the institutions themselves.
Okay, let me go first and then leave the hard part to Nerima.
Okay.
I think she's young enough; she can run when the Subaru come for her. So,
Hello?
I think the most important thing. Oh, is it Zenga speaking or? Okay, so I think one of the biggest things we need to do is protect the IEBC. We need to have the right constitutional protection for IEBC. At the moment, leaving it to interpretation of parliamentary laws or statutory law could be a real problem. I don't think the IEBC, if they get the right kind of incentive and including financing, for example, because they are desperate, because at the end of the day, they have to go to the same minister who has to win the election or who is yet to win the election to get funding, approval or treasury and all that. I think it's really, we need to think about it. How do we make it IBC at the same level as the judiciary, especially the higher court, in terms of protecting the judges and all that, because that is really important. At the moment, this nomination by political parties, nomination by the president and all that, puts them at a situation where they're really not objective. So we really need to think about that. So financing could be one and all that. But the other issue, I think we need to think about election as long term. Unfortunately, we always wake up on election when something annoys us or very close to the election. But this political education is really a requirement. Currently, even with the Gen Z situation, there is very little political awareness beyond the Twitter and elite kind of space that we're having, and a lot of votes are either lost or won in the spaces outside this digital spaces. And we need to think about how do we convert the little gains that we have in order to have an inclusive opportunity for even those ones who are where internet is not there. They can really get opportunities to really get engaged in all this kind of thing. And then there is also a need for thinking about financing, whether it's judiciary or EBC, but also when the youth are thinking about how they are going to take over from us, the older generation, they also need to think about financing, because public financing at the moment going towards election is very minimal. Most of it comes from business interests outside that space. And we need to either cushion or ring fence financing to legit kind of sources or to the public financing ability that we're having, rather than allowing all sorts of money to come in, because it gives people an unfair advantage. And this is really critical, because when you hear that MCA is asked to part with $500,000 and MP maybe $1 million or 2 million or 5 million, you really wonder, can somebody who's just graduated from university and still tamaking, where do they raise that kind of money? And if they get that money, what do they give back? And especially when you think about the gender aspect of it. So we really need to think about how do we finance our election to make it fair and open to everyone. It doesn't matter whether you're a millionaire or billionaire. At the moment, the millionaires and billionaires and their cronies are the ones who are running our economy and who are actually running our electoral process and actually making sure that everyone else stays outside the space. So, yeah. And the issue of media, I think we need to also protect the media. We need to have a media that actually stands for national interest. And we can fund it, even using public finance, rather than having these media which are so much swayed by doing business with the state. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amani. It all boils down to independent institutions. In terms of, the infrastructure, they exist. The independence is in question. All right, and you have taken us through, pointed to, make ways or methods in which that can be ensured. For Anne Katerima, I have one question here for you addressed to Anne. So as Kenya prepares for the 2027 general election amid rising political tensions, intimidation, and declining public trust in institutions, how can electoral reforms move beyond logistical preparedness to addressing citizen confidence, democratic participation, and protection of civic space? A question from Joseph Okioga. So how do we prepare and move beyond, logistical preparedness to ensuring? I think we have pointed to a few of those, but then in summary and as a takeaway. Anne?
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Ayan. Thank you, Joseph, for the question. And the good thing in Kenya is that we already know the election date. We already know it is the second Tuesday of 2027. So that's 10th of August, 2027. I know other circles are saying, oh, it might be delayed, oh, something might happen. No, the elections will still be held. It's not like our neighbors where we see they have to wait for the presidential proclamation for an election day to be set. So what can we do? It now means that we need to start becoming proactive. We know very well that elections are usually being done in polling stations, which translate naturally to our schools. So that mapping is almost coming up. And IBC will be doing that together with the national government. That is a good place for us to be part and parcel of the mapping of those polling stations. We've seen over the years, civil society and other actors and other players are locked out of the process of the mapping of polling stations. But this time round, whereby we are foreseeing almost 55,000 to around 59,000 polling stations, how can we entrench ourselves and make sure that that mapping is done according to the Constitution and the laid out regulations according to the electoral law? That is one part. Then the second part is registering to vote, and as Nerima put it earlier on, we have surpassed, but it is not enough to register as a voter. What will be a game changer is coming out to actually cast your vote come 10th of August 2027. So that's another place to also to look into. Then we are saying that we are draining the swamp, we are cleaning up the system. Are we taking part in the electoral process by becoming candidates? And I keep on saying that in Kenya, we have the most beautiful constitution in the world, whereby once I'm 18, I can vie for any political office, including the president. So what is stopping us? And what is stopping the young people by ensuring that we sponsor candidates all the way from the presidential, governor, MP, all the way to the MCA? There's nothing stopping us. The will is there, and the judiciary has also pronounced itself and said some sections of the Electoral Act are unconstitutional when you're starting to ask about qualifications, degrees, and what have you, whereas an 18-year-old, where do you expect them to get such qualifications? So we have that, presenting ourselves as candidates, presenting ourselves as voters during the election period. Then, as observers, many of us, we know that the development partners have shrunk out in terms of funding. So the funding of observation has really come down. But that does it mean that we will not observe the process? We have to be ingenious. And this is where citizen participation comes in. We come and we say we are going to do crowdsourcing. Ensure in the 55,000 plus polling stations, there is an observer there, not waiting to be paid, but there to ensure that their democratic voice is catered for all the way to the counting. And remember that the results of the polling stations are final. So once they're declared there, it is finality. And all that we can cascade and be able to do the tally, where we say we call it the people's IBC, and we get the result that is needed. Then also, citizen journalism. This is where now we take the media space. We don't need to wait for the mainstream media to give us the news, to give us. These days, most of us don't even watch news. We just go to social media and we are able to get all the news that we want to get, and even at times the analysis that come with it. That is also another way that the young people can entrench themselves, can become part. And then the last bit is ensuring that there will be no violence before election, during election, and after election. It is not worth it for a young person or any Kenyan or any citizen of East Africa to die because of a politician. This is where we say enough is enough. We are going to protect our vote and the sanctity of vote without shedding any form and any kind of blood. This is where now we put the duty bearers to account, be it the security institutions. We can check and see the curriculum that they are going to be taken through by the IEBC when it comes to election management. And also for the judiciary, we also become part and parcel. If there's any judicial process or the EDR process, we can also participate as witnesses during the court cases. So these are some or many of the ways that the young people can ensure they take part in the 2027 election.
Thank you. And Zenge, please, over to you. Zenge has a question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My question really is kind of evolving around two issues. Oh, by the way, my name is Zenge Makoloy. I'm from the Institute for Security Studies. I'm a research officer in Addis Ababa. So when we look at the ability for election observer missions to observe, in some cases they are quite critical. For example, the SADC mission to Tanzania was exceptionally, what's the word, crude or very critical of the election process in Tanzania. Even the AU mission sometimes, but the cascading effect of it reaching the department that deploys the missions, the Political Affairs, Peace and Security Department of the African Union, and then ultimately to the chairperson, the Peace and Security Council, it often gets watered down. And so therefore, when it comes to actual action amongst member states, amongst heads of states, it's more congratulatory than critical. There's the same case also in Southern Africa, SADC. I'm from Zambia, by the way. In Zimbabwe, there was an election where the SADC mission was extremely critical, but it was it became a diplomatic crisis after that. So it's even in situations where electoral observer missions might be doing their work and giving very critical, strong reports, the cascading effect towards the top of the organization or international organization, such that it should be able to act on early warning signals and indicators, is often watered down by the time it reaches the top. Just your thoughts on that. But then my other point is more so on youth movements. Also Gen Z, fairly older Gen Z, but what I notice in youth movements, which has been seen from the Arab Spring, is the focus on one human being rather than the governance architecture of authoritarianism, and the assumption that removing one person will change the dispensation. So how? Yeah, I don't know if that was a question or a comment, but how are these trends in your assessments for panelists? How are these trends affecting the longevity of the movements for democracy when you remove one person and then you find the revolution, so to speak, is captured by the military, albeit military in suits, through legal manipulation, saying a coup is not a coup, by making it look a bit more like a resignation or more like a vacancy of different positions. You can see that in Madagascar and in some other countries. Yeah, so how do you sustain a democratic momentum? In Tunisia, there's also incidences where the democratic hopes have been tempered, to put it diplomatically. So how do you see the ability for organizations, for democracy organizations, youth movements, to be able to be resilient in such a climate where authoritarianism and anti-democratic forces are extremely innovative and resilient? Thanks.
Anne and Amani. Who do we start with? I think Mr. Amani, we can take you.
I wanted Anne to pick the experience with APRM.
I can start, Amani.
Yeah, go ahead.
Election observer missions, yeah.
Yes, I can start. Thank you, Zenge. I know we've had this discussion quite a number of times at the African Union, and maybe let's separate issues here. The African Union Commission is headed by a chairperson, and currently it is headed by Mohamed Yusuf, former Minister of Djibouti. Then you have the African Union Election Observation Mission, which only comes operational during an elections. So it is not it's a mechanism of the AU, but it is very independent on how they observe, report, and document the elections. And I will give an example of this. In 2018, there was an election in DRC. And during this election, this is where the incumbent was stepping down after serving for almost 3 terms. That is the President Joseph Kabila. During that time, Faki Musa had just become the AU chairperson. And we go to DRC, we observe the elections, and the report comes out. And it was so scathing. It was even worse than what you saw in Tanzania last year on how the electoral process had been done. Just a week before the elections, the EMB warehouse was razed down by fire. Until today, we've never known who burnt it. So the elections had to be postponed. We're already on the ground, so we stayed in another 2 extra weeks in DRC. And once the report came out, and we were supposed to report, now Faki comes in, the former chairperson, and he puts aside the report that had been done by observers and read the AU report. Or when I say the AU here, I mean the AU Commission. So what am I saying? Let us separate the issues here. The EMB, I mean the commission, that is the AUC, who elects the chairperson? It is the heads of states and heads of government who meet every 4th year in Addis Ababa to cast that vote. Then you have the Political Affairs, Peace and Security Department that deploys observers to go and observe the elections according to the African Charter on Democracy and Elections and Governance, the ACDEC, plus the constitution or the laws of that country. And once they mention, they say that the elections were not credible, they were not transparent. That is what we write in the report. And that is the status. And that is why you see the head of mission at that particular time is usually a former head of state. So they have that authority, they have what can I put it? They have that charisma to speak out and declare. But now the chairperson, on the other hand, comes in and congratulates his boss. Is he doing it wrong? No, he's not doing wrong. He's doing his job. Then the independent observer mission of the African Union also does its job. So what many people is that they are not able to separate the issues here. They say, oh, AU said the elections is like this, or AU has congratulated. But it is the election observation mission of the African Union that declared that the elections were not credible. But the AU chairperson goes ahead to do his job by congratulating their bosses, which that is what happens. I will leave the other question to Amani.
Which one was it? Remind me, which one is it? I was listening to Anna, and I was just wondering how you ended up in Congo and you didn't remain there. Okay, so Ayan, which was the question? Just so that I don't lose myself. So, I like your response, Anne.
Yeah. So
it was on the sustaining democratic momentum.
Okay. So I am a student of politics. I'm a student of politics. I might not have an answer direct to that. It's a very complex. But let me say this. If you want to find a good answer for this, you need to go back to the independence, pre-independence struggle, which is quite really important because we need to realize that we need to challenge the status quo. And the women back home were able to provide food for them in the forest or wherever they were, and they were able to get us the election. They didn't have all NGO funding. They didn't have all these elitist privileges that we're having. And I've always asked myself, how did those ones who never even had a PhD or master's degree then organize better to make the colonial powers, agree or, admit that they cannot continue oppressing us anymore. And one of the things that, so apart from the mobilizing financing, it's really important to think about that, but it's also the issue of solidarity. And the example is how Mwalimu Nyerere decided that Tanzania was independent in 1961, but the independence for Tanzania was not important, Tanganyika then, unless the other countries in Southern Africa were all independent. And he had missions to support all the other countries to fight from Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Zambia, all of them until they got independence, lastly with South Africa. So what am I saying? I'm saying this, the fight for democracy and electoral integrity is not only a Kenyan thing. It's not a Tanzanian thing. It's not an Ethiopian thing. It's not a Somali thing. And we all need to come together. Just they sit around the table in AU and discuss how they are going to work with their business interest. We also need to think about how do we mobilize Gen Z across that whatever happens in
Have we lost Mr. Mani? All right. Thank you.
Temporarily lost.
Welcome back.
Oh, everyone dropped off. Okay. So quickly, I think I don't want to emphasize, but I think the issue of solidarity is really important across the region in terms of politically. It will, a lifelong approach. We need to have Gen Z, Gen Z APRM, Gen Z Regional Economic Bloc, just thinking around all those matters and working together to support each other. The fact that the president from presidents were complaining the other day how we are bending up and exporting democracy across the region. I think we should just be telling them that it's a mandate upon set upon us by the African community.
All right, I think we have lost him again. Thank you all. Thanks to the panelists, for thought-provoking and very insightful discussions on democratic processes in the Horn of Africa region as well as the East African region. I think I would have about 5 or so minutes to either give the floor to any questions. If there's anyone, with a burning question, as we say, please feel free. You can either raise your hand or point me. And we have gone through many of the questions in the chat box. So if there is no any other question, I think we can move forward to the closing session. Right? Okay. Since there are no hands up, I think we can move on. Thank you very much, our panelists and also our participants, the participants for engaging, in today's session. Thank you for making the time to join us. I'm a huge proponent of communication. We have, experts on various thematic areas, issues in the region. When we talk about elections, when we talk about conflict prevention, security, governance, the entire region is not short of, expertise. And from a point of, research, you also see the importance of having these conversations, whether it is either platforms such as this, where we come together and, converse around, emerging trends and evolving trends within the region. And when it comes to, elections and electoral cycles, democratic practices in the Horn of Africa region, we have seen for the longest time, I will say, the challenges that we continue to see today. When it comes to issues to do with participation, particularly restriction of opposition leaders and opposition parties, the debate around whether we should be discussing procedural elements or, some substantive outcomes of democracy. The work question was also raised within the chat box, and there was a conversation around the type of democracy that we are dealing with. in the region before we can even have the conversation around the integrity of one of these tools, which is elections. Then we are also seeing emerging trends such as the use of technology, and particularly with the younger population, the younger generation, where they use technology as a constructive tool to engage in electoral processes and to engage in the general thematic area of peace and political processes. We are also we have observed the issue to do with financing, where the nature of the elections themselves change from a tool for a democratic practice, or for democracy rather, to some sort of winner takes all. Let me compete. Let me invest. And it has its own challenges when you think about it, because you might be, as a leader, co-opted, into policies that only make sense to maybe the teams and the groups that are financing, the elections, rather than responding to, the what is it called, the popular will of the needs of the citizenry. In all the countries, we have in the recent past seen, exactly those challenges in countries within the region. But then when we have conversations in such a manner, and we bring our ideas together as a region, then we see where the gaps are and how to chart a way forward on either, I don't know, using adaptive approaches that work for the people of the region, rather than following a template that we have adopted. With that being said, the discussions around the voter apathy that we see in the region, and also how to overcome that. We've had similar conversations within similar platforms where young people, and I keep going back to young people, because this is the change we are seeing in the region, where for I think a long time, or for the past, we've had conversations in the region, particularly in Kenya. We'll have conversations around tribal politics, and similar discussions. But then we are seeing that change, and we're seeing that shift when it comes to young people in the region, in Kenya, in Uganda, and in Tanzania, where they either advocating for reforms or for their meaningful, participation in these processes and these spaces. These are lessons that we need to take, in terms of engaging young people meaningfully, but also giving them and providing that space for them to practice. Similarly, we have discussed, the questions. There were questions around the institutions and mechanisms that are in place. We talked about in Kenya, for instance, the electoral bodies we have in Uganda. Somalia is to an extent lacking, and it again goes back to the question on the type of democracy we're practicing, and the gradual process that we see in different countries. When we talk about free, fair elections, democracy, usually we refer to Kenya being a trendsetter, or setting a certain precedence in how we react to challenges around this specific topic, which is elections and election cycles. So we have also talked we have talked about the institutions, the electoral bodies, but also the complementary mechanisms that we see, such as the election observations, and bearing in mind the role that each of these institutions plays, and what we need to do moving forward in terms of strengthening the independence of these institutions, so that when we discuss procedural elements such as free, fair elections, then they will have, a role to play. Other than that, we see otherwise. Rather, we see the challenge around institutions that are not separate, from other sectors. And then finally, it stays with us the role, or rather, sorry, I've taken some notes. I think I've talked about voter apathy and yes. So as a region, we see our best practices. We are aware of the situation in East Africa, whether it's recent elections in Tanzania, and the spillover effects that we have seen, in Uganda and Kenya, or whether we are talking about integrity in terms of meaningful participation, not just free, fair elections that can be, at the end of the electoral process in its entirety, have institutions clearly state that issue. We've seen that, with election observation missions and other institutions coming out to say whether an election was free, fair, and they have those definitions already, identified in terms of who is voting. Elderly people being respected or given, a priority in terms of voting, less able people, and so on and so forth. So they refer to those. But then the discussion is to go beyond that, and we need to look at where the challenges are when it comes to, the substantive issue, which is, to me, and the conversation we're having today is meaningful participation. So where is the civic space? What is the role of young people? What is the role of the media when it comes to ensuring, the integrity of elections, when it comes to ensuring the smooth transitions, when it comes to the democratic processes that we see in the region. We will have those recommendations also forwarded to our Horn Institute, which is hosting this webinar. And I think with that being said, unless anyone has a burning question, I will hand over to Ms. Elizabeth to see if there is any other remarks in regards to our closing.
Thank you so much, Ayan, and thank you so much to our panelists, Ms. Katharima, Ms. Nerima, and Mr. Muhinda. Thank you also to our participants who made this engagement very interactive. I'd just like to remind you that the Horn Institute does host a monthly webinar. Each month we host a webinar on emerging issues in the region in regards to our thematic areas, and we'd like to request you to just check out our social media pages, our LinkedIn and X accounts, to stay up to date on what's happening. With that ado, I would like to mark an end to this webinar, and thank you so much for tuning in. Have a lovely weekend ahead.